Hey guys, this is Frankie Edgar, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Hey, this is Rich Franklin.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris Lieben. This is Diego Sanchez. Randy Couture.
Alistair Overeem.
Hi, this is Stephen Bonner.
This is Don Fry.
Hey, I'm Phil, Mr. Wonderful Davis.
TJ Dillashaw.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Welcome to Submission Radio. It's been a crazy week in MMA. Lots of big things happening. It's a pleasure to be here again. Dan Shkradov here with Kasper Ozalowski. A fine lineup for you guys on this week on Submission Radio.
Yeah, it is a fine lineup. It's been a bit of a musical chair session with the guests. Yet again, people getting sick, people cancelling last minute. But we do have a nice, sexy show for you guys today. A lot of interesting people to speak to. Brian Stann, the All-American, will be making his debut on Submission Radio. I actually spoke to Brian a couple of days ago, so it is a pre-record, but it is a juicy interview, so we got lots to talk to him about. Audie Attar, the founder and president of Paradigm Sports Management. Tons of guys there like Chris Weidman, Conor McGregor, Michael Bisping, Uriah Hall, Stephen One Boy Thompson, our very own Jake Matthews. So we'll be speaking to Audie about a lot of things, mainly surrounding UFC 200 and Conor McGregor, so hopefully you guys will enjoy that. And then we got Erik Magraken, probably not a massive name that you guys are aware of, but he handles combatsportslaw.com, and we've got him to discuss this Jon Jones arrest and break that down. And then speaking of breakdowns, we got Kirik Jenness to talk about the hot topics from MMA. Kirik, of course, very famous for The Underground and MMA.tv, so we got a nice juicy roundtable for you guys, so pretty stacked show, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And before we jump into it, guys, just a quick reminder, if you do want to follow us on Twitter, it's at SubmissionAUS. We've had a lot of fun on our Facebook, Submission Radio Oz, where people have been jumping on, giving us their opinions and letting us know their thoughts on the big topics in MMA. So keep doing that. Keep sending us messages. We love chatting to you guys. But without further ado, we've got our first guest on the line, and Cass, you're about to introduce him.
All right, guys. Joining us here on Submission Radio to discuss the legal drama surrounding Jon Jones this week is none other than Erik Magraken, who's the sports law consultant and man behind combatsportslaw.com. Erik, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I want to say it's, given the caliber of guests you folks get on week after week, it's very flattering to be invited on your program.
Well, you're right up there, Erik, when it comes to the industry of law. Now, let's get into it. I mean, before we get into Jon's trial this past week, we'd like to go back to where it all began when he was pulled over by the police in Albuquerque. I mean, watching the video, it seemed like Jones got the rough end of the stick, receiving 5 fines for seemingly nothing. But from what you saw in the video and what was alleged, can you explain what exactly did Jones do wrong to get so many fines?
Well, it's tough to say from the video itself, other than a bit of a abrasive confrontation between Jones and the officer, right? Mm-hmm. Neither of them were maybe on their best behavior that day, but what's important is what happened in the minutes before that video, and that was never publicly released. All that the video shows is that the officer has one opinion of what transpired, and Jon Jones has a strong, differing opinion of what happened. The police officer believed he was drag racing and somehow driving recklessly, and Jon Jones says he was doing nothing more than revving his engine. So nobody knows what happens, but what we do know is this Thursday, when Jon was brought before the New Mexico courts, he pled guilty to a probation violation. So there might be some more truth to the police officer's views as opposed to Jon's, but who knows? We could only speculate about what happened in those minutes before the camera started rolling and that video was leaked on the internet.
Yeah, I definitely want to touch on the fact that Jones, admitted guilt. I want to cut to that a little bit later, but before that, people have been talking about how the footage was released of the confrontation, but nothing before that. What do you make of that? Is that the usual, or is that strange to you at all?
Well, I have no idea what position the officer's vehicle was in before pulling Jon over. So oftentimes officers have dash cams on their vehicles, and if Jon was in front of him, he could have recorded what happened, and that evidence might be out there. But, and we could just speculate here all day long, but for example, if Jon was to the left of the officer, his dash cam might not have caught that. So I don't think in and of itself it's not unusual that no video of the alleged infraction was released.
Mm-mm. Now, as a lawyer, if someone in the same position as Jon Jones, if someone was in the same position as Jon Jones, what would you have recommended to your client to do other than not swearing at the police officer? Was there anything Jon could have done or said to help reduce the severity of what happened?
Yeah. No good comes typically from arguing with the police. If the officer's dead wrong, and this officer might have been dead wrong, at the scene, the best thing to do is just to shut your mouth, sign the ticket, say, have a nice day, move on. the forum for fighting these things is the courtroom. That's when it's time to argue. But when it comes to having a bit of a aggressive interaction with the officer, no good comes from that. Maybe Jon would have been let off with a warning, but instead he's hit with 5 tickets, and before he knows it, there's a probation violation thrown in the mix as well. So the best thing anybody could do when there's a run-in with an officer like this is just take your ticket, sign it, and if you want to fight it in court.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think the actual part where Jones called him a pig and the other things was after the tickets were written. But speaking of the actual trial itself, Jones and his team admitted a violation of his probation, thus giving up his right to having a hearing where he could have put forward a case and brought witnesses. Was it the right way to go? Because Jon plans on fighting the traffic violations, therefore, wouldn't that mean he doesn't believe he violated his probation?
Yeah, that's right. So every time Jon has a run-in with law enforcement while he's under probation, he has to report that fact itself to his probation officer. And I'm not sure if he did that. That might be the probation violation he was pleading guilty to, as opposed to the underlying traffic offenses, which are pretty minor in the grand scheme of things. But the one thing I wanted to impress to your listeners is this: Jon is currently under probation for a felony offense. When he had that hit and run back in 2015 involving that pregnant woman, he pled guilty to a 4th-degree felony, and he received a pretty good plea bargain out of that guilty plea. The judge gave him a conditional discharge, which means his criminal record is going to be wiped clean. He's not going to be a convicted felon if he complies with all of the terms of probation. So every time Jon has a skirmish with the law like this, he's really gambling a lot because, in offensive drag racing isn't a big deal. 9 out of 10 times people aren't going to pay attention to that, but Jon is number 10 out of 10. Because of his underlying probation, every time he's guilty of violating the probation, he's risking jeopardizing that initial plea bargain, and if he can't get through his probation clean, he's got the risk of actually being a convicted felon as a result of it. So it's really important for Jon to keep his nose clean for the next 10 or 11 months or however many months are left under his probation sentence right now.
Now, the district attorney's office wanted the judge to impose a nightly curfew on Jones from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. That was the only added condition of probation the Jones team fought, and it was denied by the judge. Looking at how the trial played out, were you surprised with the outcome, especially considering that Jones already got a stern warning in September and has since gotten more speeding tickets?
Yeah, it looks like he doesn't have the best judgment when it comes to using a motor vehicle. He's got a bit of a history building right now, but I wasn't surprised by the result because it wasn't a trial. It was through a plea bargain. Both the prosecution and Jon's lawyers reached a deal, and the only thing they were fighting over was whether that curfew should be imposed, and the judge didn't impose that. But usually when the prosecution and the defense lawyers work out a deal ahead of time, courts by and large accept those deals.
Okay, it's good that you explain that to us, because you're talking to a couple of guys who know zero about the law, and I don't know how much the listeners know either, so I'm glad you explained that. One of Jones's new probation terms is not being able to drive without permission of his probation officer. Can you just explain that one for us? Because it sounds like any time Jones wants to drive, whether it's to the gym or go to the shops around the corner for some milk, he's going to have to contact his probation officer. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the judge gave the probation officer the power to say when Jon could drive. Now, as between Jon and the officer, maybe they'll work it out so anytime during daylight hours he could drive without specific permission, and at night is when he has to, get specific clearance. I don't know if it's going to be more open-ended than that, or if Jon has to call the probation officer every single time he wants to, do a quick run. But what's important to glean from all of this is even though these are fairly minor offenses he was charged with, now the terms of his probation have been heightened. Now he has to do 60 hours more of community service. Now he has to get permission before driving. Now he has to take an anger management course. Now he has to take a safe driving course. These are, for an elite athlete training for a fight, these are real impositions on his schedule, and there's more things now. He's under greater scrutiny for the state, so there's more opportunities for him to screw up. So the more he, runs into the law and the tighter his probation gets, the easier it is for him to screw it all up and flirt with fire with that initial felony charge coming back to haunt him. So for his sake, hopefully he could get through the next 10 or so months without any more run-ins with the law.
Well, fans are pretty happy with that the UFC 197 main event is still happening. Even after DC injured himself, OSP has stood in and the fight is still going on. But the judge did issue a stern warning to Jon that if he comes back to court, it won't go well. The big question is, what could be the potential consequence, like you mentioned, if Jon breaches his probation again?
Yeah, and so it's going to depend on why he breaches his probation again. There's real degrees of it. If he gets charged for impaired driving, for example, I think that'd be real trouble for him, as opposed to a more minor offense like another speeding ticket or something like that. But again, the biggest penalty he could be facing is having his probation revoked. So if he violates his probation, the court has discretion to revoke his probation, and then they could substitute new terms in, or the harshest thing they could do is they could make him serve the balance of his probation months in jail. So you don't want to mess around with probation violations because the courts do have a lot of power. And again, the jail wouldn't be the worst of it. The worst of it would be by not satisfying the conditions of his probation, he could end up being a convicted felon because of the underlying guilty plea. And that could be a real problem for anybody who needs government licenses to make a living. Jon Jones, like any other combat sports athlete in North America, needs to be licensed by provincial or state athletic commissions. And if you're a convicted felon, you're going to have a tough time traveling overseas and fighting out of the U.S. So, there's a lot of nasty consequences that could come Jon's way if he keeps running in with the law. And that's why I say hopefully this is just a hypothetical situation and we don't have to find out what happens next time Jon gets dragged before the courts. Hopefully it's something that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I don't know if he'll ever fight here in Australia, but it's good to know that he'd at least have that option. And just as we let you go, Erik, we appreciate your time. Looking to the future, Jon plans to fight the traffic violations as his team claims they're bogus. What do you think his chances are? Because it'll essentially be his word against the police officers. Do you think he has a chance? And let me add this, by admitting that he revved his engine, which to my knowledge, I believe is classified as, exhibition driving in Albuquerque, did he bury himself and make it harder on himself to prove his innocence?
Yeah, and again, I don't know if his team even plans on fighting those charges again, because the biggest threat from those charges was the effect on his probation, and that's all sorted itself out. In terms of speculating whether he has a shot of beating it or not, who knows? I have no idea what the officer observed or how well he'll come across, but if it comes down to a he said case, it comes down to who the more credible witnesses under oath on the stand, with the judge staring them in the course of trial. So who knows how those charges would go. But when traffic charges are disputed with evidence, they oftentimes don't hold up. It just comes down to what Jon has to offer compared to what that officer has to offer the court.
Well, I mean, given the background and history of the Albuquerque Police Department and given Jon Jones's background, that would be an interesting trial right there. But Erik, we want to really thank you for your time. Guys, make sure to follow Erik on Twitter at Erik Magraken and visit combatsportslaw.com. Tons of great articles there. And again, Erik, thank you so much for stopping by and sharing your wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on, guys. Cheers.
Hi guys, it's Joanna Jędrzejczyk, UFC strawweight champion. Listen to Submission Radio.
All right, guys, our next guest is the founder and president of Paradigm Sports Management, which represents such fighters as Jake Matthews, Chris Weidman, Michael Bisping, Uriah Hall, Stephen Thompson, and of course UFC featherweight champion Conor McGregor. He joins us here on Submission Radio to primarily discuss UFC 200. Audie Attar, welcome to the program. How's it going, man?
Gentlemen, thank you for having me. Appreciate you guys. All's well. Can't complain.
Oh, well, great. Well, thanks for joining us on the program. Now, before we discuss UFC 200 and McGregor's rematch with Diaz, we just want to go back in time to UFC 196. RDA pulls out due to injury, and people were throwing names around as late replacements. Obviously, Diaz got the fight, but we're just wondering, Audie, was there anyone else who got close to getting it if the deal with Diaz didn't work out?
I think a couple guys did. I think Conor kind of gave it thoughtful consideration and looked at all the options possible as he should. And, it was an unfortunate kind of last-minute replacement, so you really didn't have a lot of time to digest and analyze and go back and forth. However, it all worked out in the end. You have to talk to all of them at once and kind of see where the chips fall, if you will.
I'm just curious, in a time like this, you being his manager, how much of the decision-making is to do with Conor McGregor, and how much is it sort of your input in this case?
It's always the athletes, and in this case, it's always will be Conor's decision. I think all high-level athletes and intelligent athletes are going to look at all their their data that they're getting from their respective teams, whether it's their coaches, whether it's their management, and they're going to make a decision. It's always their decision. So in this case, it was no different. I think an athlete like Conor, he has a very high level business acumen as well. So he understands certain things, which is always fun to watch as well.
Well, the fight obviously didn't go his way, and he was very humble in defeat. But I'm just wondering, how much did the loss affect him, and how difficult has it been for him to deal with it over the last sort of month or so?
From what I see, he's motivated by it. So I think everybody saw a side of Conor that we've seen, which is someone that's humble and eager and really driven to learn and continue to grow. So I think this defeat was something that he's going to be able to and has already learned from. And, I'm excited for UFC 200, so he'll go back out there and be able to prove really what he can do.
Well, the fight's on. I mean, looking towards UFC 200 itself, many people felt that McGregor should have perhaps defended his title against Frankie Edgar instead of taking the immediate rematch with Diaz. I'm just curious, how close was the Edgar fight to coming together?
I think it goes back to what I just said. He kind of looked at all the options that were out there, but he was really motivated in getting back in there and competing with Diaz again to show what he can do. So at the end of the day, Frankie got consideration, Aldo got consideration, but ultimately it was Diaz that won out.
Well, Dana White said that McGregor was a bit obsessed with wanting a rematch against Diaz. I'm just wondering, from a manager's perspective, how did you feel about that fight? Did you at all try and talk him out of it? And did you think it was the right choice for him for this UFC 200 card?
I think, you go through all the options and you assess it and you analyze all the pros and cons of everything. But at the end, when you go back and watch the fight, I think Conor started the fight. He looked really, really good, So I think with some minor tweaks and the accurate assessment and analysis as to what went wrong, I think everybody's already learned. And I think that collectively as a team, we all support the decision. We think that UFC 200, there's going to be a different outcome and a completely impressive Conor McGregor performance from an athletic standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, exciting times. It seemed like he came in with the wrong strategy at UFC 196, trying to knock Diaz out in that first round. There's a lot of fans that feel Diaz may have the edge over Conor due to the fact that he'll have a full training camp this time. How do you see the second fight playing out in McGregor's favor? Obviously, you say it's going to be a better outcome for him. What do you think he'll do differently, Audie?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's gonna fight his fight. I think he's gonna not try to force things. I think he's gonna manage his energy a lot better, and I think you're gonna see, a different outcome. I think if you looked at kind of how the fight started, I liked how Conor looked, and so in terms of Diaz having a full camp, Diaz is one of the best fighters in the game. There's no question, and he's an athletic freak, and he's a gym rat. I should say training rat. He's not only in the gym, he does all types of stuff. But I mean, I don't care if he's taking a couple shots of Patron. It doesn't mean he's not training either the day before, the day of, or the day after, So at the end of the day, I think it's going to be great for Nate. Hopefully it just means that the fans are treated to just one hell of a fight at UFC 200, and it's just an amazing, amazing event.
Now, we love conspiracy theories here on the show, so we'll share one with the audience and we'll see what you have to say. I mean, with Kenny Florian being adamant the GSP is returning this year, many people have pointed to this fight taking place at 170 to set up a potential McGregor GSP fight. Despite Dana White claiming the winner of Edgar Aldo is next, how likely is it that McGregor's next fight could take place against GSP?
I think that I could tell you from an official standpoint, it's not like it's something that's ever been discussed, but when you hear the market reacting, the market speculating about it, it only sets up for a potential super fight, right? So, I think that's a good thing. It's healthy for the sport, and I think that now that you're starting to see kind of out-of-division super fights, it's pretty cool, right? At the end of the day, sometimes a belt doesn't necessarily have to be on the line for it to be the most anticipated or watched event in the sport's history. So that's exciting, for all of us who love the sport and who work in the sport as well. And the fans I know are just delighted to get the treats that are kind of teeing up.
Oh, for sure. And I think your point about there not necessarily having to be a belt, UFC 196 was a good proof of that. As a manager, the McGregor GSP fight, could it possibly end up being one of the biggest fights in UFC history? How much of a goal is it for you to make this fight a reality?
I would say that, the goal of having the best records all around in the game is something that Conor's publicly stated he wants to do. And I think for us, we share that type of ambition and paradigm. So at the end of the day, whether it's GSP or whoever it may be, the super fights are what we want, and we want to continue just to grow the sport globally.
It's interesting to see what's going to happen with that. Now, we have to ask about the title. It's been well documented how tough the weight cut is for Conor to get down to 145. And Gunnar Nelson, he's been on the show a number of times, and he's told us he'd rather see McGregor at 155. In all honesty, Audie, how many more fights do you see McGregor having at featherweight?
I think it's there's no, it's not black or white, right? This is a difficult sport. The discipline that these athletes have to kind of subscribe to and live by on a daily basis, in all aspects, but in particular the diet and nutrition, is unlike any other sport. So at the end of the day, it's all about what the person can handle by doing it healthy, right? That's the key. You don't want to do an unhealthy cut. So in terms of Conor, I mean, look, it's tough, but not a lot of people could do it, or they would, but he's always done it in a way that's healthy and allowed him to perform at the highest levels. So he'll do it for as long as his body will let him do it, right? That's kind of what it comes down to.
I'm just curious because obviously as a manager, you've got a relationship with him. I mean, we've spoken to people in his camp who said how hard it is to watch him make that cut and how much they worry about him. From a personal standpoint, do you ever worry about him making these big cuts? I mean, they would certainly have an effect on his body.
Yeah, I think you always worry about, any athlete that's cutting unhealthy. I think it's to watch how hard it is in terms of the discipline. I think that's what I'm more in awe of, right? But I've never seen him per se pass out and do some things that that are unhealthy, even in terms of how he gets down, right? He does it all natural, and just by a lot of hard work and a lot of discipline. So at the end of the day, I want him to feel comfortable. It seems like he liked not cutting weight, right? And I don't think any of us will. There's a Snickers commercial that airs here in the U.S. I don't know if it airs in Australia, but it's where just a bunch of normal guys that are playing on American football on the pitch. One guy's hungry. He turns into Betty White. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, we've got that. Yeah.
Right. Okay. You need a Snickers, and so it's like you never want to see someone go through that. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I've never seen it to be that extreme as you're kind of making it out to be. I do know that per his reaction for not cutting weight, I would rather him do what he's more happier to do, right? As an athlete. But these guys, again, just have to put in so much work and have such a high level of discipline. It's unlike any lay person, For you to train that many times a day, for you to eat that strict and disciplined, the normal person can't do it, right?
It's crazy seeing him make that walk every time to the scales. Here's what I'm curious about, Audie. Dana White said that regardless, win, lose, or draw, Conor McGregor is going to be facing the winner of Aldo or Edgar for the interim title. Is there a chance at all that McGregor vacates his belt and never fights at featherweight again? I mean, you're saying
that would have happened. That would have already happened. Because that's something that Conor was adamant about. He wants to keep his belt. He's going to defend it. And, at the end of the day, if he was going to vacate, it would already happen.
I'm just curious, what did Conor think and what did you think about this interim title being introduced? Because it was an unusual circumstance to have the champion on the card fighting, because usually interim title comes into play when someone's injured. What did you guys think when you saw the interim title?
I think it's a smart decision by the UFC. I think you got him on the same card as us, and now it hypes up, that title defense. So at the end of the day, it's a tough decision. Who do you give it to? If we were actually going to defend the title right now, who do you give it to? Do you give it to a guy like Jose who's never lost, right? So does he deserve the automatic rematch, or a guy like Frankie who's just kind of built up this momentum and fan support of claiming that he's next in line, right? So I think having them fight is a smart decision because it builds their profile up and potentially the biggest card in the sport's history, and then sets up for a nice little rematch.
We'll be discussing that a little bit later on the show, but I mean, here's the other thing. Have you guys sort of looked at future matchups? Obviously, we're talking about, Nate Diaz, which is the next one, GSP in the future one, and then there's GSP potentially, and then there's Aldo, Edgar. If he beats Aldo, Edgar again, one could make the argument that he'd cleaned out the division. Do you think afterwards we may see him at 155 permanently?
I think I think all possibilities are on the table, right? And I think you just have to go one fight at a time. I think that that's the beautiful thing about this sport. You have to you have maybe 2-3 fights a year, but these moves may be maybe 2 years from now, right? So just depending on when they happen, you don't know. Maybe they never happen, in our lifetime, as in some of the past lures and super fights that never happened in this sport, right? So at the end of the day, it's like just right now, the main focus I think for Conor is, as it should be, is nothing but his business and UFC 200. Having another go at it.
Now, before we let you go, 6.5 years going strong. It seems like Paradigm is clearly one of the top management companies, especially in MMA, with Stephen Thompson's rise in the welterweight division, Uriah Hall's fight with Silva at UFC 198, Chris Weidman rematching Rockhold, and of course Michael Bisping coming off a massive win, not to mention Aussie Jake Matthews. As a founder and president of Paradigm, describe how great it must feel to see your management company become such a powerhouse, especially considering you originally built it from nothing.
Well, I appreciate it. We got a great team, and we have a lot of improving ourselves. So at the end of the day, it's almost like we're going after our own fictitious or imaginative belt and Hall of Fame allure, if you will, right? So like we just got to keep our head down, and yes, we're on the right path. Yes, we've built something great. So it's good to stop. I like to high five my team because without them, we won't be able to do it. And we just got to keep our head down. Let's keep working. Let's keep getting better.
Yeah,
so I appreciate the recognition.
No, of course. You get an over-the-phone high five from Submission Radio. We've been watching, obviously, the company progress over the last few years, especially. We know there's big things happening, but what is next for Paradigm? And are there any big things or plans or landmarks for 2016, Audie?
Well, just continue to grow. We got some great additions. I think some hot talent. The signing of Rico Verhoeven, Glory Heavyweight Champion, was really big for us. We're really excited about him, and kind of going through this period now, figuring out what the next move is for him, and both kickboxing and MMA. So that's exciting, and just continue to kind of add the right type of clients, continue to improve on things for our guys, and hopefully we have multiple championships in all sports this coming year.
Now, Audie, before we let you go, I guess one of the biggest things we have to talk about, UFC 200 aside, our very own Jake Matthews got a big win over Johnny Case here in UFC Brisbane just a couple of weeks ago, so we have to mention him, and he's obviously one of your clients. Biggest question is what's next for Jake? Because he's a very sort of non-committal, I'll fight anyone, anywhere kind of guy. Have you guys thought about who might be next for Jake Matthews?
We did. We've been communicating with Team Matthews. We're all back in Melbourne now, and we had our eyes set for Diego Sanchez. That was a fight Jake really wanted, and his team, including his coach and his dad, Mick, we agreed. We thought it would be a great battle. It would be a great name for Jake to kind of go and continue to showcase his growth as a mixed martial artist and as an athlete. But Diego was already squared up, and unfortunately we missed that one. So there's a couple names that we're tossing around. We have a conference call with Team Matthews this week, and we're kind of going to sit down and talk about all the remaining options. But I could assure you that he's definitely keen on getting back there soon. I know he's, there's a rumored to return to Australia. Your next summer, our winter. So towards the end of the year, but he wanted to get in there before that. So I know he's riding the momentum. He's continuously growing as an athlete, and so we're hoping to get him in there before the summer. But we'll see kind of how everything shakes out.
I'm curious, what was it about Jake that made you want to sign him in the first place? Because you don't really have too many Aussie clients. What is it about Jake? Well,
it's an international sport, so when we look at prospects, first of all, it's sometimes very organic. In Jake's case, he had Gary Scott, who's now also a great teammate and part of our team. He's our agent and our boots on the ground in Melbourne. Gary Scott he's a successful businessman in his own right, and really kind of took the reins of managing Jake, but sought out key organizations, and we were one of them that they wanted to align with just to get more of an expertise and support. And so he was in great hands before, but I think that now joining forces and now Gary being part of our team, it's amazing. But for Jake, what stuck out was really his all the different attributes from a physical standpoint. So his age, when you look at a scouting report on the kid, he's not only, this is a young man's sport, even as the sport continues to grow and gain experience, if you will, you see the ages start to go down, right? So you start to see at one point, Jake was the youngest athlete on the UFC's roster. I think now he's the second youngest athlete. So he's even been beaten out now. But it's a young man's sport. But when you look at his height, weight, speed measurables, how explosive he is, how he moves, he's light on his feet, he's in and out. The guy has a great, well-rounded arsenal of ability from a mixed martial artist standpoint. So he could stand. He's a great striker. He has a lot of upside from a movement standpoint, good depth perception, good power. And then you look at his ground game. I mean, the kid just continues to evolve. I think that the Vic fight was, a turning point for him. I think, at the end of the day, if you lose, you only have the ability to learn from that experience. And he did just that. And you've seen the last two fights, him go through an amazing kind of growth right before our eyes as not only a striker, but as a grappler as well. And his takedown defense and his ability to kind of stay calm, cool, and collected, and in some sticky situations from a grappling standpoint, and then the ability to get back up on the ground and then even finish the fight on the ground. So, for us, we saw all those qualities in him. At the end of the day, there's still the human element, and you don't know how that's going to play out. But, when you look at Jake, he checked all the boxes from a scouting analysis standpoint. And he comes from a market that we feel that has a passionate mixed martial arts fan base that's only going to grow. And and this was prior to the legalization of the cage in Melbourne and in that province and in that region of the country. So, we just thought that Jake would be a kind of perfect fit to what we look for as a client, not only from an athletic standpoint. He has a look, he's marketable, he's well-spoken, he's a great kid, very educated, very articulate. So we just saw him as a total package. And most importantly, we really liked him and his team. That's very important because it's not always easy. And, even on a team, there's going to be ups and downs in a career. It's not linear. I wish it was, but it just isn't. Even at the highest levels of success, you're going to face trials and tribulations and some bumpy moments on that journey. So it's important that you like the people that you work with. And he's surrounded by a really good group of people from, like I said, Gary Scott, his father Mick, who's also his coach, which is a good thing. But Mick's been smart to really surround himself with some of the best coaches, from a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu standpoint, from a boxing standpoint, and I'm really, really impressed kind of with the team that he's surrounded himself with.
And you know what? The fact that we've spent personally a lot of time with, both Gary, Mick, and Jake and shot some techniques with them and stuff like that, we can definitely attest to that. And the fact that Jake, he's wise beyond his years, and every time you speak with him, he's extremely confident. The other thing is, I'm no manager, but you would think it's a good sign considering how young he is. He's got a lot of years to sort of grow and, a lot that you sort of gain from that. I'm just wondering, you guys at Paradigm, you sort of look at the client roster, you've got people all around the world. You got, Jake here in Australia, you got Michael Bisping in the UK, you've got Conor in Ireland, you've got people in America like Chris Weidman and Uriah Hall. Are you guys, and not to mention you've got basketball players, football players, are you guys trying to take over the world? Is that what's going on here, Audie?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, we're just, like I said earlier, we're just trying to win our own title and get inducted in our own Hall of Fame. We just, we're very, very fortunate to be able to do what we do. At the end of the day, professional athletics is something that we all love and we're passionate about. And for these athletes, I'm an advocate for them. This is a vehicle for them to create a healthy living for them and their families. And hopefully they could then carry that over and sustain that type of lifestyle thereafter and into the next phases of their life. Because I was a meathead, as we call them here, one time in my life as well. But as were you probably. So at the end of the day, they all have to move on, and I'm sure that they will stick around in one form or another around the sport that they love.
Yeah, it's an interesting path that you've taken, obviously, from self-appointed meathead to managing other quote-unquote meatheads. The other thing that I'm curious about is if you look at your clients, like, say, Conor McGregor, he's captaining the ship for MMA in Ireland in a big way. Then you've got Chris Weidman. he may not necessarily be captaining MMA in America, but he's a former champion and he's going to be fighting for the belt. Do you think that Jake Matthews is kind of like the biggest hope for Aussie MMA? Not in the sense of, Australia in general, but in the UFC, he sort of seems like he's got the biggest promise of, all the Australian fighters.
Well, and at the end of the day, you don't want to take away anything from guys like Mark Hunt and
Right,
other
yeah.
just kind of legendary Australian fighters. But I definitely believe, and we're bullish on that idea that Jake is, in fact, the future of Australian MMA and the future of MMA in general on a global level. So I think that he has that star power. He has that athletic ability that he's going to make his Aussies proud. But then I think he's going to just captivate a lot of the fans worldwide.
And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on Aussie MMA in general, Audie? I'm pretty sure I saw you here for UFC Brisbane. Correct me if I'm wrong there. What was your sort of, feeling that you got from it?
That is my second time in Australia. First time was actually third time, excuse me. Went to Sydney, Melbourne, and that's Brisbane. That was my third time. And I love Australia. I love Australian people. I feel that, as an American, I could relate to the culture in a lot of different ways, and then the fans are very passionate. So I think having gone to the biggest show in mixed martial arts history in Australia, in Melbourne, I think that the sky's the limit. I feel that the buzz is just continuously growing. So hopefully in my next visit, I continue to see that growth of mind share and energy just from a growth in a fan base standpoint, where it's rivaling AFC and other major sports in Australia.
Awesome. Well, you've got a lot of clients, obviously, Audie. There's plenty of other names that we'd love to talk to you about, but I think we're out of time. We'll have to get you back on the show in the future, talk about some other talent that you've got under your roster at Paradigm. But again, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us. Guys, don't forget to follow Paradigm on Twitter at ParadigmSM, and if you are going to check out their website, it's paradigmsm.com. Again, Audie, pleasure chatting to you. Thank you so much.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for the time. You guys take care.
And there you go, guys. Audie Attar, guys. Pleasure to speak to. As we mentioned before, we do have Brian Stann coming up. It was a pre-recorded interview that we did a few days ago. Obviously, because it was a few days ago, some of the things are slightly outdated, like no mention of Ovince St. Preux versus Jon Jones at UFC 197. But there's a lot of juicy stuff talking about Cris Cyborg and a whole bunch of other topics talking about Jon Jones' arrest, etc. So without further ado, guys, here it is. Brian Stann that we spoke to a few days ago. Enjoy.
All right, guys, our next guest is a former UFC fighter who's one of the best analysts in the MMA game today, a Marine and war hero, a former WEC light heavyweight champion, and a CEO of Higher Heroes. It's a pleasure to welcome Brian Stann for the first time to Submission Radio. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, I appreciate it, guys. Thanks so much for reaching out and getting me on.
No, it's a huge pleasure, especially because it's your first time. And congratulations, a couple of weeks ago marked 3 years officially since you first commentated in the UFC. Looking back to 2012, which feels like an eternity ago, did you expect to have such a successful career as an analyst and commentator and have people wanting you to potentially see you replace Joe Rogan in the future?
I can't say I expected that. I certainly hoped. I hoped that it would work well. I was retired, hadn't announced my retirement yet, but I went and I auditioned to call football, which was something I had never done before. But I went for it, and a bunch of other, really talented American football players, went for it as well. I happened to get it. And a couple months after receiving the position, that's when the UFC called and asked me to call that first pay-per-view. They said, look, we've got a hunch you can do it, and we want to give you a shot. And a few days after the event, they called me and said, hey, look, as soon as football season's over, we want to get you in the rotation. So I was fired up because, look, I love calling college football. I've called boxing events, love doing it. But I'll be honest with you. If I have my choice, I would be cage side calling those fights each and every time. I mean, it doesn't feel like work to me. I love it. I love this sport. And more than anything, I love the athletes in the sport. I love watching them go on this journey, talking to them and trying to do my best to tell their story and tell the story of the fight that they're in right now. And it's just a blast for me. I'm really honored to do it, and I will ride this wave as long as I can.
Well, I'm just wondering, because fans were a little bummed out. Were you bummed out when you found out that you wouldn't be flying to Australia to call UFC Brisbane? Because to our knowledge, we don't remember you ever coming down to Australia.
I've never been to Australia. I've wanted to go. I mean, come on, let's be honest here. There's people who say, oh, I've always wanted to go here or there. and they're lying through their teeth, right? But everybody wants to go to Australia. Let's face it. And so I've wanted to go every year. The problem is that Kenny Florian lives in Los Angeles. And so typically it's a little bit easier of a flight to send him, vice me, out of Atlanta. And so I keep missing these opportunities. The next card that comes up, seriously, I'm going to call him and say, look, man, is there any way, how can I sweeten the pot here and get a trade?
You need to do some behind-the-scenes sabotage work and make sure Kenny Florian is somehow sick on that day so you get the gig and fly down to Australia. But in all seriousness, we don't have too long with you, so we're very excited to pick your mind as an analyst about some MMA's biggest topics. This week saw some big news in Cris Cyborg's first fight in the UFC being announced against Leslie Smith at UFC 198. It's an exciting time for fans. Tell us, what do you think of this matchup and Leslie for stepping up and taking it?
You know, I like it. And I got a lot of criticism on the internet because I pushed out a tweet saying that, I like the fact that Leslie Smith jumps at these opportunities. You can't, a lot of fighters say, I want to be paid more. I want bigger matchups. I want to be on the main card. But then they don't take chances like this. And I've met Leslie before. I've called one of her fights before. And she's a pleasure to be around. A very positive-minded woman who believes in herself and knows that, look, it's not over until the fight actually happens. And so I like the fact that she jumped at it. Nobody else wanted it. And I'm happy that Cyborg, one of the, if not, one of the best female fighters in the world, finally gets a shot on the biggest stage. I am very close friends with her nutritionist who gets her on weight. And I'm confident that she can get down to 135 eventually and will do that. And I want to see how she does against the best in the world, because that's not who she's been fighting. Although Invicta is a fantastic promotion, I want to see how she does. So I'm excited. I plan to be down in Brazil for UFC 198. So I should have pretty good seats to watch that bout, and I'll be watching closely.
Oh, yeah, and that's an amazing card from what we've seen so far. It's shaping up to be a huge event. I'm just curious, you have confidence in Cyborg getting down to 135. I'm just wondering where that stems from, because she, for years, said she can, then she can't, and then recently she sort of said, look, I'm done. I'm not going to get down to 135. Why are you so confident that she'll do it now?
Well, my buddy George Lockhart has literally had to live with her to get her on to weight before. He'll rent an apartment down the street. I mean, he manages her day to day, and he's told me, look, she can get on weight. The frustration from her end, I think, is finding the big fights and finally getting one, where I think there was, it doesn't make sense to bring her over unless it's going to be against Ronda. I think there was a lot of different factors in the game. I think her frustration was like, you know what? If I'm never going to get consistent fights at 135 and be brought over to the big show, then it's not worth it for me to go through all this. And, I think that's her frustration. I think she can make the weight, and I think it would be the best financial opportunity for her to do so. And if my buddy George says he can get her there healthy and allow her to perform the best, then I believe him. I mean, I've never seen him proven wrong before. He's absolutely fantastic with these athletes.
So I'm just wondering, because people are sort of saying that this is like a Cyborg. She almost has her own division. She's a 140-pound fighter, or at least in the UFC, she's fighting catchweight. So do you think that this is sort of like her dipping her toe in, and eventually she will make it to bantamweight as opposed to just taking big fights at catchweight?
Yeah, it is. And you know what? People love to point out, well, this isn't fair. This isn't fair. Look, nothing's fair in business. Okay, we all have regular jobs, and we see things being done unfair all the time. Someone just got hired onto a company, they've been there for 6 months, and they get the big promotion that the person who was there for 4 years didn't get. These things happen. And the bottom line is people are intrigued by Cyborg. She's been crushing people for years, and people want to see her in the big show. And so finding a way to gradually get her comfortable and get her in, and get her on a big card in Brazil in front of her own people, it made sense. And nobody really wanted to fight. And if everybody turned it down, it wouldn't happen. But there was a girl out there named Leslie Smith who says, you know what? I want to be a big name fighter. I want to be someone that everybody knows. Here's my opportunity. And I think she's in a win-win situation. I think if she can get this fight out of the first round, she's going to exceed people's expectations. But she's tough. She's tough. She trains with some really talented people. Don't be surprised if she comes out there with a pretty good game plan and can add some wrinkles that maybe people don't expect. Whereas, we know what to expect from Cyborg. Cyborg's going to come out very aggressive, and she's an excellent athlete. She throws massive bombs, and she presents a huge challenge to any woman on the planet in mixed martial arts, regardless of weight. But we'll get to see her at 140 and get a view. How does she look at 135? Can she bring all that power? Can she be that aggressive at 135 pounds? This will be a little bit of a tell if Leslie can challenge her, if Leslie can survive in there. And who knows, man? I'll tell you what, I've analyzed a lot of fights and a lot of skills and technique in the last year and a half. There's everything is pointing towards the direction that this fighter should win based on their skill sets, their technique, and their current life and training situation. This fighter should win, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Nate Diaz shouldn't come in on a 5-day training camp after doing shots in Mexico, shots of alcohol, that is. He drinking on a boat on vacation, comes in with like a 5-day training camp and finishes Conor McGregor. That shouldn't necessarily happen, but it did. And that's why I tell anybody who thinks that they're so certain on any fighter in this sport that you got to be careful. I've been doing this for a couple years now, and I've been surprised many times. In fact, me and John Anik have called 2 cards where I think every single underdog won. I know there was one in Natal, Brazil, where every underdog won. We did one other one where I think all but 2 favorites lost.
It's a crazy sport, Brian, and I think you're right about Leslie. I mean, she's coming off a huge win over Inakai, and like you mentioned, a charismatic person. We spent some time with her in Brisbane and very excited for this fight. But moving on, I mean, there's some other big news in the world of MMA this week. Jon Jones was pulled over by a police officer for allegedly drag racing. Now, Brian, some people see this video as an example of Jones being mistreated by the police, while others see it as an unnecessary controversy surrounding Jon Jones. I'm just curious, what do you make of it?
I think both of those claims have some validity, right? Any wrongful treatment or profiling that Jon Jones is receiving, he can't play the victim here. He's got to accept the fact that, I chose to do something that was going to be a public job. I want to be a star. I want to make the money of a star. Well, guess what? Stars endure more attention than other people do. Then he also made the choices that ended up in a hit and run accident. So if you think you're going to do something like that and not attract more police attention, you're wrong. It's going to happen. But when I watched the video, certainly Jon seems to be adamant from the beginning that he did nothing wrong. Typically, people who are guilty of something aren't that confident that they didn't do anything wrong. Right. And Jon was right away, which leads me to believe that there may be some validity that he's being targeted and profiled in that city. But he has to understand the fact that he's brought some of that on himself, and he could have handled that situation differently. He can be upset and he cannot call names. There's no need for you to call an officer a name. There's no need for you to make some of those comments. I get that you're frustrated, but you are the champion of the world, and that is only going to bring more undue attention on you now. You insult a police officer, he's going to go back to the barracks, and more people are going to be looking for that white Corvette. And if you run a stop sign, you can expect somebody's going to see it. If you run a red light and it may have been yellow, you never know. You may hear about it and get issued a warning. But he's asking for more attention when he calls them names as well. And so it's a tough situation. I mean, we've all done that. We've all sped, we've all run. I mean, we all make those mistakes. But at the same time, when you choose to do something that pays you millions of dollars to be the champion of the world, you don't get as much flexibility as other people do. And he's brought some undue attention on himself through some of his actions. And so it's tough. It's not going to be easy. And I know that town. That's a small town. And if you become the villain there, it can be really difficult moving forward. So he's got some decisions to make and be smart so he can keep his focus on what he needs to do. And that's beating Daniel Cormier instead of having to focus on, dealing with Albuquerque PD.
It's interesting that you say that, Brian, because, I mean, you described the situation very well. I'm just curious, do you think that if Jon, for example, didn't call the police officer some of those names, then this situation would be almost completely different? Do you think that if he sort of refrained a little bit, that this situation could possibly even be clearer as the police, mistreating Jon and really Jon doing nothing wrong?
Well, I mean, I don't think it would have gotten him out of a ticket, right? The officer pulled him over for a reason and had every intention of giving him a ticket, right? But knowing that he was being filmed on a chest camera, he could have chose to say different things, and it would have been better for his brand as a fighter and for the narrative that he has really worked on improving his character and doing the right thing, right? But when you go on there and you get that frustrated, then you call names. I mean, I think there have been plenty of people that would have believed him that, hey, he was wrongfully profiled because he's Jon Jones. He has a loud engine, and he did something that may or may not have been a mistake. I think a lot of people would have sided him. But once you go and call someone disgusting and a pig and everything else, you're crossing the line when you're name calling. You can get your point across and say, I think this is wrong what you're doing, and I will go to court to prove my case. You were wrong from behind me. I was not drag racing. Could have done it better. But again, that's hard. I'm not him in the moment. I'm not. If I was wrongfully pulled over and getting issued an expensive ticket, I'm sure I'm going to be upset too. But I think for him, he's got to take a deep breath and start to think a little bit, because he's not going to get out of this, unless he just wants to retire right now and walk away from fighting. It's just going to happen. There's going to be a lot of attention brought on him wherever he goes, especially in a small town like Albuquerque.
Sure. And just last thing on Jones, you've known the man for a number of years. With more controversy going to UFC 197, does this do anything to hurt Jon Jones going to the fight with DC, or do you think it doesn't really even affect him?
I don't, Jon, I will tell you, distractions really don't matter to him. It doesn't matter. This sport, he's a guy who this sport has come to naturally more than any I've ever witnessed. So I don't think it does anything in terms of, the fight or any of that stuff. But I do believe it actually helps sell more tickets. I really do. I think that more people are going to tune in, and they're either going to take the side of, this guy's being wrongfully targeted. He's trying to clean up his life. He's trying to do the right thing. Or other people are going to say, I can't stand this guy. Who calls a law enforcement officer a pig and all these? You shouldn't be doing that. Just keep your mouth shut. There's going to be both sides. It's going to generate a lot. I mean, look how many people are talking about him now and talking about the Daniel Cormier fight. We were all already interested, but now you're getting a lot more people talking about the fight. So, at the end of the day, I think it's going to put more money in his pocket to sell more pay-per-views. Now that's not me saying he should go do more of it. That's the exact opposite what I'm saying. Call it a day. Hire a driver. Get a Honda. People don't pull over people driving. Well, no, never mind. You live in America, buy America. Go buy a little Ford car, Ford Fusion or something. People won't pull you over as much.
Buy Prius.
Yeah, that's it. It's time to call it Uber driver. Now, we mentioned UFC Brisbane before, Brian, but a couple of weeks ago, obviously, there was a number of massive upsets here in Australia. Fighters such as Dan Kelly and to some degree Jake Matthews got some big wins. But one of the fights that didn't really surprise people was Mark Hunt's knockout over Frank Mir. You mentioned how Frank had nothing left to prove, and you may possibly like to see him retire and come over to a commentating job. Now, for those people who didn't really catch your thoughts on Fox Sports when you spoke about it, can you sort of explain your reasoning behind it?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I'm always overly cautious when it comes to this game and fighters fighting too long. And people don't like it sometimes. People say, who are you to tell anyone to retire? Look, I'm not in an authoritative position to tell anybody to retire, but I am an analyst, and they ask my opinion there. And I'm thinking of Frank Mir, the father and the husband. I've seen Frank Mir with his family. He is a very good family man. I don't think he has anything left to do to prove in this sport. I mean, he's a 2-time champion. And that's despite a very bad motorcycle accident that he overcame, came back. It was still an elite level heavyweight for a very long period of time. He's got massive wins. He's an excellent analyst on television as well. He's called fights before. I think he's got a bright future ahead of him in all that. It's just not worth taking any more damage to the head. Anybody who wants to kid themselves and act like a lifelong of getting hit in the head and in a list of concussions is a positive thing, they're wrong. Now, that being said, we all accept that risk in this sport. We do. But there is a time. There's a time when you have to say, look, the risks no longer outweigh the benefits. And for Frank Mir, I don't think it outweighs it. He's been TKO'd or KO'd 8 times in his life. He has a lot more to live for. He no longer needs fighting financially, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of things Frank Mir is capable of. And he's got a beautiful family that he has to lead and that he's got to provide for. And if you push it too long in combat sports or worse, I mean, you see what happens in American professional football, it can be very, very negative, and it can take away your ability to provide for your family and have a great quality of life. I want to see Frank Mir have good quality of life in his 50s, not in his 30s, and not just now when he's still fighting. And so, I'm looking at it as Frank Mir, the father, coming from Brian Stann, the father, and a guy who, one of my first interactions with Frank Mir was I fought in the WEC. I fought there one night, and I didn't have availability to any really good training when I was in the Marine Corps. And so the promoter there had asked Frank if after the fights he would meet me at the gym. So it's 1:30 in the morning in Las Vegas, and I fly out back to my base the next morning, and I'm in Cobra Kai gym doing jiu-jitsu with Frank Mir, and he's teaching me the proper escape to an armbar. Wow. That's the first interaction I have with Frank Mir. How many guys are going to be willing to do that? And I'll never forget that time. And he was a great guy, a very smart man, and I don't see the reason to do something that could jeopardize that going forward.
He's a man who's very generous with his time, and as far as commentary, I think Brian Stann and Frank Mir, people talk about dream fights, but that's like a dream commentary team that I think a lot of people will be interested. But moving on, let's talk about the current landscape of the UFC. Currently, it seems like UFC 200 will be headlined by McGregor versus Diaz #2. Your thoughts, Brian? Do you think the rematch makes sense?
Financially, I do. I mean, you can't deny the revenue it generated. And look, let's be honest here. Everybody who puts the gloves on and walks in the octagon, and the people that put the money up to get the lights on and air this thing on television, they're all in it to make money, and that's always going to drive the decisions. I would love to see Frankie Edgar fight Conor. No doubt about it. I want to see how he would do up against that kind of challenge, a guy that can take him down, that can grapple, that has excellent cardio. How accurate will McGregor be against a guy who's a little bit faster than him? How will Frankie hold up against a guy who's unpredictable and has so much depth in his striking game as Conor? There's a lot of things I'd love to see about that fight, but that Conor Nate Diaz fight, the buildup in a short amount of time was excellent. It sold massively, and when you look at the numbers, if you're Conor McGregor and you're sitting back there saying, hey, who do you want to fight? His answer is going to be whoever helps me make the most money. If you ask Nate Diaz, who do you want to fight next? Whoever makes me the most money. And both of those guys made their best payday ever fighting each other. And so you can't blame them for wanting to run it back either. And I know a lot of hardcore fans definitely want to see Frankie get the shot. I'm one of those guys as well. But I totally understand the business reasoning behind doing the rematch. And honestly, if I'm coaching Conor right now, look, I mean, guys at that level can beat anybody on any given night, right? But if you're a manager of a fighter, you got to constantly keep their best interests in mind. If he loses to Nate Diaz again, he's back where he is right now. If he goes out there and fights Frankie Edgar, it's a very dangerous fight for him, and he loses to Frankie and loses his 145-pound title, that really hurts the Conor McGregor brand. That does further damage to it, and that's harder to recover from. That may leave, it may take longer to get back to those big Conor McGregor paydays after that fight. I'm not sure what his contract is. So, from a business side, if I'm managing Conor McGregor, that's the way I'm looking at it. My job is to make him the most money over the longest period of time I can. It's get him this rematch in a fight that he clearly won round one, have him fight smarter, but get him in a fight where he has the least amount to lose when you're coming off a loss. If I'm managing Frankie Edgar and I want him to get that fight, Frankie's just not a boastful guy. He's probably one of the highest character guys in UFC rosters. A great husband, great father. He's incredible, an incredible fighter. But he's going to have to go out there and do something to make it personal. He's going to have to do something that he hasn't done before to sell a fight, to get his name out there. Not his style to do that. He likes to talk with his fists and his skills inside the octagon. But I'm pushing him to do everything in his power to campaign and get that fight, because that's the fight that Frankie wants, and it's the fight Frankie needs right now, so he can make the most money.
The burning question for fans is, why do it at welterweight when both fighters are more suited for a fight at lightweight? Now, there's a bunch of theories on this, but why do you think the UFC are looking to go with that weight class? And do you think it has anything to do with setting up a future fight against GSP? Because there's been a bit of that going around as well this week.
Yeah, who knows? That certainly could be a consideration. Honestly, as close as I am to this fight game, I have not heard anything definitive on GSP's return. So anything that I've heard is an opinion, and nobody knows for sure. I think, GSP, I know him personally. I haven't spoken to him in a long time, but, he could be a guy that's waffling a little bit on that decision and what he wants to do. I think doing the fight at 170, I have no idea. But in my perspective, if I put the Brian Stann promoter hat on, I do the fight at 170 because Conor's a guy that eventually, he sells a lot of tickets, right? So, but the other thing is he's a guy that could potentially fight at 155 pounds one day. We all know that's where his career may lead him. So if he happens to lose this fight again, it's better for him to lose at 170 because it just sounds better, right? It sounds better to have him lose at 170 at a welterweight division where he fought up 2 weight classes, vice just fighting up 1, because that kind of hurts his marketability at 155 pounds if he decides to enter that weight class one day.
For sure. Great.
That is pure speculation. That's inside the head of Brian Stann. I have heard nothing from the UFC on that, if that has any impact on their decision.
No, of course.
It could very well be the 2 fighters want to fight at 170.
Sure, and we definitely appreciate your analysis and your honesty, Brian. Let's jump over to your career. You've obviously had some great wins in the UFC, but fans saw you retire after you expressed concern with fighters using PEDs, and one of your key losses, and one where a win could have really potentially gotten you a title shot, was to Chael Sonnen, who famously failed multiple drug tests. Now that the sport has better testing, do you feel like there may be a chance you'd return for a fight or two? Because we're hearing rumors about potentially Brian Stann maybe having some more fights.
I'll tell you, not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about it. And certainly when we got this new drug testing into place, I considered it. But, stepping out of my own skin and looking at the situation and thinking about my family, what's best for them, and my current career projection in business and both on television, it's tough. It's tough to launch a comeback at my age and say, hey, honestly, if I'm going to come back, it's because I believe that I can compete for the middleweight title. And it's really hard to be honest with yourself. But when I stepped back, a year ago and looked at the middleweight division, I had to be really honest with myself. If I'm coming back, it's going to be for selfish reasons. It's not going to be what's best for my family in terms of any long-term damage I may endure. And do I really, just take, not being Brian Stann, just be an analyst, look at my tape, look at the tape of Luke Rockhold, look at my tape, look at the tape of Chris Weidman, Jacare, Yo Romero. I'd like to believe I could beat every one of those guys. But, Brian Stann, the husband and father, has to really take into account, are you willing to put your family through that? And at the same time, if you're going to go ahead and try and fight those type of guys again, you can't be taken off every weekend to do broadcasting. You can't have the time to run a company that has nearly 90 full-time employees. You got to focus just on fighting. So the opportunity cost of all the other ventures I have that I'm going to do a lot longer than my fight career are pretty heavy. And I could lose, and I could lose big. And so again, the risk outweighed the gains, and that's a tough decision. It's a tough thing to be honest with yourself as a fighter, because we all like to think that we can beat anybody on any given night. And every day I go to the gym, I still visualize myself making that comeback, but it's not going to happen, man. I'm almost 36 years old. I'm not as strong and as fast as I was 3 or 4 years ago, and that's just a fact. And so it would be, while I still think I can go out there and I can compete with the number 10 through 20 ranked guy in the middleweight division and do pretty darn well, it's not worth it, because then I could lose my position as one of the guys in rotation of broadcasting. And then I could forfeit my position. My board of directors may say, you know what, we can't have you running this company anymore. We've got to find somebody else because you're not focused enough. And those are opportunities I can't lose. Those are the opportunities that sustain and provide for my family.
I'm very impressed with your honesty, Brian. I'm just very curious. You mentioned that the part of the risk would have been for selfish reasons. What were those selfish reasons, if I may ask?
Well, it's glory, it's attention. That's the hardest thing for fighters to walk away from. We everybody loves attention. Everybody loves being made a big deal out of, and that's what's tough when you walk out of fighting. People no longer ask you about all the cool things you used to be a part of. And the other piece of that is, for a guy like me, it comes at a cost. It's not just the fights. It's every day in the gym. It's the cumulative headshots that I've taken since I was in 3rd grade playing American football. I played Pop Warner football in America, where we hit each other hard every single day. And I did that for 6 years. Before then, I played 4 years of high school football. Then I played 4 years of college football. It's a lot of shots. Then I went in the military and had some things go on there. And then, I fought for nearly a decade. That's a long tenure of having a massive head like I do and getting hit in it. And you run some of those risks. And when you look at things like CTE and some of the things that are happening, I think our sport's really trying to get ahead of that, whereas the NFL is vastly behind it. You just heard 2 owners in the National Football League say ridiculous things about there not being a connection between, football and certain side effects of getting hit in the head. It was ridiculous, and it was ignorant for them to say that. I think that in our sport, we're being more honest, even though we're much, much younger. And it's not like my head trauma solely comes from mixed martial arts. I don't feel like I took a lot of damage in this sport. Where I took a lot more damage was in football. And having called college football, having been on the sidelines with an NFL team this season, I could tell you that sport is far, far, far more dangerous than mixed martial arts.
Yeah, certainly. And we appreciate the honesty, Brian. Literally, we could sit here all day. We have so much stuff to talk to you about, but our time is up. And you guys can check Brian out on Twitter at Brian Stann. And for all your U.S. listeners, make sure to support Hire Heroes, which empowers U.S. military members, veterans, and spouses to succeed in the civilian workforce. You can find out more information at hireheroesusa.org. As always, Brian, it's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Thanks so much for having me, and great questions, man. I really appreciate it, and I'm definitely going to look into starting to listen to some of these episodes because you guys do a really good job. So thank you.
Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Demetrius Johnson, the UFC flyweight champion of the world, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
All right, joining us here to break down some of the big news stories from this week in MMA is none other than the founder of The Underground. He's an innovator in the world of MMA. It's a pleasure to welcome Kirik Jenness back to Submission Radio. Kirik, welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure, deep pleasure to be here once again.
Well, the deep pleasure is all ours, and let's jump right into it because we've seen a bunch of exciting UFC fights announced. But before we jump into the craziness that is UFC 200 and UFC 197, let's talk about the UFC debut of Cris Cyborg at UFC 198 against recent UFC Brisbane winner Leslie Smith. Kirik, this debut has been a long time coming, but were you surprised at all when you saw the UFC 198 announcement?
No, I had actually had some conversations with Cris Cyborg's manager about trying to drum up some support for it. Although she fights for Invicta and is the Invicta champ, she's paid for and signed with the UFC. The plan, of course, was always for her to drop to 135 and have the mother of all women's super fights for against Ronda Rousey, but that fight became less super when Ronda lost her title, and I think realistically she cannot safely drop to 135. So it was a situation where she was dangling in the wind a little bit, and I'm delighted. I'm incredibly happy that the UFC did the right thing and got a fight for her, and I have a huge amount of respect for Leslie Smith for stepping up. And all those people who are saying Smith has no chance and are making predictions it's going to end in the first 30 seconds would do well to watch some of the fights that have recently happened. It's probably the same people that were saying Conor McGregor was going to crush Nate Diaz, and we know how that turned out. The reason you have a fight in mixed martial arts is because you don't know how it's going to end. That's why you have the fight. So I don't think there should be any predictions.
Well, Casper, as Kirik mentioned, Leslie Smith, a lot of respect, and she's known for being a brawler. She's coming off a big win at UFC Brisbane, where she showed a lot of heart and a lot more well-rounded skill than people thought that she had. Are you giving her any chance against Cyborg in this one?
Listen, she's definitely improved a lot over the last few years, and we saw an improved version against Rin Nakai. I may be one of those people, Kirik. I think Leslie has a tough night ahead of her. Now, am I saying she's going to be knocked out in 30 seconds? No, nothing like that. I think her toughness will be a huge attribute, but one of the advantages she has is the fact that, she has trained at Cris Cyborg's gym in the past and sparred against Cris Cyborg, so she knows what she's getting herself into. Leslie claims that the sessions went pretty well, according to an interview she did with MMA Junkie, so obviously something about the way those sparring sessions went gives her confidence that she can win the fight. The only problem here is the Cyborg has the exact same advantage. She also knows Leslie's game. Granted, it has evolved. Leslie's a natural flyweight, while Cyborg's a natural featherweight, so the size difference will work against her. She's tough. She's never been knocked out or submitted, never been finished in her life. The closest was against Jessica Ai when her ear exploded and the doctor stopped the fight, but she was very committed to continue and fight in that fight against Jessica Ai. She's not exactly a knockout machine, Leslie, but when she does stop her opponents, which she's done 3 times in her career, it's usually later in the fight, so Cyborg, meanwhile, finishes her opponents very early. She's also successfully gone to decision twice. That's Cyborg. Looking at Leslie's 8-6 record, her biggest wins have come against Raquel Pennington and Rin Nakai most recently, while Cyborg 15-1, her biggest wins have come over Marlos Conan and Gina Carano, both of whom are former champions. So the caliber and opponent is different compared to Leslie Smith. I think Leslie's toughness may make for an exciting fight, or probably will. A huge question is, how will Cyborg look at 140 pounds? So there's a lot of X factors here, but ultimately I'm going with Cyborg on this one, and I think she may even give Leslie her first TKO loss of her career. Not saying it's in 30 seconds, and I don't know how the fight's going to go, but that is my prediction. Let me know if you disagree, Kirik.
So it sounds like you're not promising to get a Curitiba tattoo if the fight goes Leslie's way.
No, because otherwise I'd have a 209 tattoo at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that Leslie Smith is obviously not the favorite in this fight, but I also there's two factors. One of which you addressed already, which is it may at 135. There's no question whatsoever in my mind that Cris Cyborg would be a physically weaker individual than she is at 145. She would have to lose a lot of muscle mass, and she has a very strength-based game. I'm not putting her down at all. I'm a huge fan of hers, but she does have a strength-based game, and the loss of, say, 5 pounds of muscle mass could be very significant. Even at a catch weight of 140, I can see that happening. And the other thing from Smith's point of view is this is a no pressure fight for her. She's getting a huge opportunity to fight in front of a massive crowd in Curitiba on a pay-per-view. She's undoubtedly going to be compensated well against arguably the greatest women's fighter in history. If she wins, she gets a title shot, and if she loses, it's not a ton of pressure. So I think with those two factors, she may do better than people anticipate. And like I said, the reason you have a fight in this sport is because you just don't know what's gonna happen.
I'm just curious to see what's gonna happen in terms of the strategy that she brings to this fight, because as we all know, she loves to brawl. She comes in and she likes to strike. But over there in Brisbane, I was very impressed with her grappling skills. You know, she versed Rin Nakai, who's a fantastic grappler, and she was able to get out of some really tricky positions. So I'm wondering, because I know she trains, with Gilbert Melendez and the crew down there. I'm wondering if we're going to see a bit of a smart strategy from her, where she's not going to come out and just go straight into a brawl, because she knows that's what Cyborg will want. And if she'll try and mix in more grappling, maybe a bit of grinding in there to, get the fight away from what gives Cris Cyborg success. But then again, you run into the fact that Cyborg's a good grappler as well. So it should be a good fight. But like you mentioned, Kirik, I do agree with the fact that she does have a lot to gain from it, in the sense that her name recognition will grow, a lot more respect from fans, and she can go to bigger, brighter things from there. But, I mean, let's just quickly touch on another announcement of two big fights for UFC 200. I mean, it's sort of old news now, but everybody sort of expected it. Diaz versus McGregor is now official as the rematch and the headlining fight for UFC 200. And also a big curveball, something that not that many people expected. Frankie Edgar versus Jose Aldo 2 for an interim title. It's been a few days. It's sunken in, and I want to get your thoughts on it first, Kirik. What do you think of those matchups?
The Jose Aldo Frankie Edgar fight, I think is going to be the fight of the night. There are days when those are my two favorite fighters in the whole sport. And to see those two guys go after each other is just going to be a gift for the hardcore fan base. I think it's going to be a long, tough fight. There's a portion of the MMA crowd that hangs around. They're the type of people that hang around the emergency room entrance when they hear ambulance sounds, and I don't think it's going to be a slobber knocker where two guys with no skill basically beat on each other. I think it's going to be an incredibly technical duel between the two, and I can't wait to see it. The Diaz versus Conor fight is the money fight. It's going to be the biggest fight of the year. As I said a couple of times publicly, I think that, and I'm not putting him down at all, I think that Conor McGregor's whole game is a straight left hand. I think that's what he's got. And I think, as Joe Lozon said, everything from his top knot to his touch button in the park, movement training, and his kicks. Everything is just to set up that straight left hand. I think Diaz trains with world-class boxers, at least one of whom's a southpaw. I think he's been training at the top of the game for a decade, and I don't think that straight left hand, particularly now that he's tasted it, is going to be enough to beat him.
Bold prediction from Kirik. I'll give you my thoughts on. I'll go the Conor McGregor fight and Nate Diaz first, and then I'll cut to you, Dana. So at this point, it's kind of pointless to look at matchups from a rankings perspective or whether they make sense. I mean, McGregor versus Diaz, it doesn't make any sense from a perspective of weight classes rankings. The fact that the first one just happened and it was decisive or anything really, but like you said, Kirik, it will generate a large amount of interest and money, therefore it is in a sense the right matchup. The hardcore MMA fans understand that it doesn't make sense, but the casual fans want to see Conor McGregor redeem himself against Nate Diaz, and so the general public will buy it. It's essentially a do-over for McGregor, if we're being honest. Lost the first one, here's his chance at redemption. There have been closer fights in the past that never got a rematch. There have been long-term champions that lost their titles that never got a rematch, and yet the first one is so decisive. Diaz beat Conor despite coming in on short notice, not in optimal shape, and he pulled off the win. Conor, on the other hand, was fully trained for a fight. He doesn't train specifically for opponents, so there's really no excuses there. So no disadvantages for Conor to warrant a rematch. Having said that, I do think if anybody has earned any quote-unquote favors from the UFC, it might be Conor McGregor. I mean, fighters who like him and don't like him, they'll admit that he has done good things for the sport. He's raised the interest level and things like that, and he has saved cards in the past. I'm not saying it's fair. It's not fair, but he has made a lot of money for the UFC. If anyone's going to get any favors, I can understand, it being Conor McGregor. Is it fair? Is it fair? No. Not to Frankie, not to Aldo, not to a bunch of other fighters. Is it the fight that I wanted personally? No. I wanted to see McGregor versus Edgar, but I can understand it. And just before I cut to you, Dennis, so the people that say it's unfair to Nate because it takes away from his first win, normally I'd agree. You beat a guy, why do you have to prove yourself and fight him again? Like, if it was a title eliminator and they redid it, ridiculous. But he wants big money fights. Now he's main eventing what could be the biggest pay-per-view and event in company's history. He's sitting pretty. He stands to make a lot of money. If I'm Nate, I'm not complaining. I'm waiting to count my money and dive in a pool of it like, what's his name? Scrooge McDuck.
It's an interesting situation, isn't it, guys? Because it's so easy to be critical, and I have been so critical of this fight, saying it's not what I wanted to see, and talking about the implications of losing the star power that Nate Diaz has if he loses this fight, and Conor McGregor losing a lot in my eyes if he loses it again. But I'm trying to be grateful this week as an MMA fan, and looking at this, I'm just grateful because I know, look, it's going to be a great build-up. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be exciting for the fans. It's going to bring a lot of casual fans to this card. It's UFC 200. I guess in a lot of ways, this is a UFC 200 type fight. And I'm just grateful, I suppose, that at least we get something. I mean, a lot of times we have injuries. Obviously, DC not making this Jon Jones fight. We'll be talking about that very, very briefly. And it's at least nice to see that, okay, is it the option that we wanted? I'm sure that Kirik and yourself, Casper, like you mentioned, you wanted other options. I did as well. But at least there's something still there. At least this is still going to be fun for all of us. We're going to look back at this probably in about 5, 6, 7 years. I don't know if we're going to be talking about how great of a decision it was. I mean, let's look back at that James Toney, Randy Couture fight and talk about it one day when we have some time, have a bit of a laugh. But I don't know if we'll be up at that level. But I'll be honest, it's still a spectacle. It's still exciting for me. I'm still excited to see the outcome. I know it's pretty ridiculous for a lot of the hardcore fans. I know that a lot of people are saying it's a bit of a waste, but I can see the point. I can see they're going to be bringing in money with it, and I'm just grateful for the fact that we're going to see Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor fight so soon after the last fight. What about this whole Edgar versus Aldo fight, Kaz? Just quickly, are you a fan of this interim matchup?
Yeah, the only thing that throws me off is that Aldo and Edgar, they're fighting for an interim belt on the same night as the champion is also fighting. So, normally you got an interim title belt when the champ's been injured or stripped or out of action for whatever reason, but he's literally fighting that night. I guess the upside to having an interim belt is that it guarantees the winner a title shot afterwards. So if Frankie wins, he's finally getting that overdue shot. It's locked in. There's no more, Misha Tate-style swerves where, okay, he might get the next shot. Oh, wait, here comes another title eliminator. Same thing for Aldo. It's what he wanted. He wanted to come back for the McGregor rematch. Well, it's kind of as good as it gets. And if McGregor does end up leaving the division, then all the better for them because they end up being the real champion anyway. Not that they would have beaten him, but if he vacates the belt, well, then interim belt's kind of there already. So if you're not going to give either guy direct title shot against Conor, it's the next best thing. Also, being on UFC 200, it's actually a big deal for each guy. If it does end up being the biggest event in company history, they stand to make a lot of money. And if Frankie can win, he'll most likely be headlining the first Madison Square Garden show, which, hey, it may even be bigger. Not bigger, but it may be for him better than headlining UFC 200.
Kirik, I'm very curious because to me, this interim title is almost a way of the UFC saying, look, there's probably a very real possibility that Conor McGregor won't come back down to the weight class depending on what happens in his future. And there's obviously that GSP conspiracy that me and Casper love in the welterweight, because why they're fighting at the welterweight division because of a possibility of a GSP fight. Do you think that this interim title is sort of a way that if Conor doesn't return to featherweight, hey, at least now you have another champion?
I've been saying publicly for a little while now, I don't believe that Conor McGregor is ever going back to 145. I think the reason he wants the fight to be at 170 is fighter juju. I think he lost that fight to Nate Diaz at 170, and he wants to take it back. He wants to get that fight back at the exact same weight at 170. I don't think he's obviously going to have a hard time making 170, but I do not see him ever coming back to 145 ever again for the rest of his life, barring a car accident where both his legs fall off.
Jeez, and then you'd hope he wasn't fighting at that stage of his career. The commission, who knows, maybe in Texas. Now, let's get on to Jon Jones and talk about all this craziness that's surrounding him. And before we jump to this switch up UFC 197, it's just been crazy, everything that's been going on. Let's go into the controversy that surrounded him beforehand. I mean, it's been a crazy week for him. Everybody knows he's been pulled over by a police officer for suspected drag racing. There's been some really mixed opinion on what happened. Some feel like it's another black eye for the police, who have had a lot of criticism about unfair treatment in the US and here in Australia as well over the last 12 months, and it seems like over the last few years. And others feel like it was another controversy where Jon Jones mishandled himself, calling the police officer names like pig. Let's discuss this situation, guys, because it's one of those gray areas where a lot of people have different opinions. I want to go with you first, Kirik. How did you see the situation?
I think that cameras are, I think that social networks are too ubiquitous right now. I think Jon Jones is probably a pretty nice guy to his friend. I think he's probably in his personal life kind of a jerk, and I don't care. It doesn't mean a single thing to me. Randy Couture had about 18 wives. It doesn't matter to me. I think given the rise of social networks and the spread of every little bit of information about a person that goes wrong, they broke up with their girlfriend, or their girlfriend, said that they broke a window in the house. I think there's too much of that. I don't care that Jon Jones called a cop a swear word. It doesn't have anything to do with my life. It doesn't have anything to do with his ability as a fighter. And I thought it was a non-issue. We didn't run it on the underground until the fight was in jeopardy. And then we made a sort of editorial decision not to run it. But when the fight was potentially in jeopardy, we did finally run a story on it. But I think Jon Jones is probably kind of a jerk, and I think that doesn't matter.
What about you, Cass? What did you make of this whole situation?
If we're talking about the footage itself, I mean, without seeing what happened before the video, the body cam was shot, I can't really comment on how guilty or not guilty Jon was, but I do have a few notes based on the footage. Look, I do feel for Jon Jones. He's obviously clearly under the impression that he's not done anything wrong, and he stands by it. Again, whether that's correct or not is an entirely different matter, but for the most part, he was compliant with the officer, and I actually found the officer to be a massive dick on a power trip who, to me, instigated a lot of the back and forth. If you listen to it, he seems to be quite passive-aggressive, and he's keen to go back and forth with Jon, which I found really unnecessary. Take, for example, when he approaches the car, he asked Jon Jones for his license and registration, and as Jon Jones is getting his license, Officer Brown asked the question, why are you drag racing that Cadillac? He waits for Jon to answer, and as soon as Jon goes to answer the question, he cuts Jon off. He goes, "Sir, driver's license and registration insurance, please," as if Jon Jones wasn't giving it to him, which he wasn't, because he asked him a question. It's kind of like, well, do you want the license? Do you want the rego? Do you want the explanation? What is it? There's also a moment when Jon Jones says, "I did not drag right," meaning drag race, because he fumbled his words, and he immediately corrected himself, but still the officer condescendingly feels the need to correct him and say, "I didn't say drag right, I said drag race." It's like, dude, You know what he meant. Why are you being an asshole? And this is before Jon Jones was rude. So I've got a bunch more points. But Dennis, what did you think?
Well, to be honest with you guys, I think there's a big problem in the world with police taking advantage of folks. And I just saw that as a situation as the police being very, very rude. Over here in Australia and over there in America, I mean, there's so many incidents of negativity around the police. And I feel like it gives the whole police force a black eye and makes what they do sort of less respected by the civilians. And I think that's unfair because just because this guy was a dick, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to start saying, oh, the Albuquerque Police Department don't do anything. All they do is give out bogus fines and treat people like shit. But I just think it's a really bad example. I really feel like if you're a police officer, your job is to look after the people. There should be a level of respect. And even though I do realize Jon was quite rude near the end, and a part of me really wishes that he wasn't, because if he wasn't, I feel like it would be a stronger point towards this whole thing of police officers sort of taking things into their own hands and, overdoing it in certain areas. I still felt like, like you mentioned, Cass, the police officer was a huge dick. And, I'm human as well. And I've had a lot of instances where police officers have pulled me over and have treated me unfairly and have been really rude to me as well without any real proof whatsoever. And I really think that in these situations, it just gives the police officers a really bad name and the forces a really bad name and makes people think like all they do is pull over guys like Jon Jones and give them 5 fines out of nowhere, where a lot of them are working hard to, try and actually save lives and help people and stuff like that. So to me, it was another case of mistreatment by a police officer because the guy was driving a Corvette, maybe revved his engine at the lights and was well known in the area. And that part really pissed me off more than Jon's, sort of calling him a pig.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing about Jon calling him a pig, it's certainly not something that I would stand by. I don't think it's the end of the world. Look, I wouldn't recommend it. I've been pulled over by police many, many times for traffic violations. I'm to this day paying off literally tens of thousands of dollars for traffic violations. But as far as, the way the cop handled it, I'm kind of on the opposite side, Dennis, where I've had a lot of police pull me over, and they've all been really nice. And when I get pulled over, or did in the past, I would be extremely submissive not to give the cops a reason to give me more fines, and with me hoping that they may let me off. And in the past, it's worked in my favor. I have been let off on certain things, even though I did things wrong and did things illegally. So if I was giving Jon Jones advice, I'd say, dude, just don't argue. It's not really the place. If you're going to argue it in court. And really, there's never a time when you argue with an officer that he's going to be like, you know what? You're right. You've convinced me. I'm not going to give you this ticket. What was I thinking? So it was a stupid thing on Jon Jones's part, but I wouldn't crucify him over it. Calling a police officer a pig, it's not going to serve you well if they go over it in court. But it's not the end of the world. As far as revving his engine, apparently that is an illegal thing. Albuquerque have some pretty strict laws on things like that and modification of cars. So and that's another dumb thing. The fact that he admitted that he revved his engine, he kind of admitted his guilt there. So there's a lot of stupid things that Jon Jones did, but I think we've all done them. There's probably a lot of people listening right now who have had far worse experiences and maybe have done worse things. That just the big difference is that when we do it, it doesn't get picked up on TMZ.
Well, let's jump to this big switch up. UFC 197, DC pulls out. I mean, a lot of people thought this was an April Fool's prank, thinking, oh, no, DC's fine. Nothing's really happened. We can't wait for this fight to happen. Then the truth sets in. This is no longer April Fool's. It's April 2nd, and DC is still not fighting UFC 197. People are freaking out. Kirik, a few fighters threw up their hand to fight Jon Jones, one of those being Aussie Mark Hunt. Another obviously being OSP. OSP was the person that was chosen, but who did you want to see? Who did you want to see?
It's Jon Jones versus OSP?
Breaking right here. Yeah, Kirik's initial reaction. There you go.
Holy Christ.
Yeah.
I better not swear. Wow.
You can swear if you want, but yeah.
That's big news.
You didn't know this?
Goddamn no, this is all brand new to me. This is, Jesus Christ. Wow. That's a tough fight for OSP. All right. I'm sorry for blurting out like this. I'm probably as shocked as everybody else hearing this if they're hearing it for the first time.
Talk to us through the shock, Kirik. What's shocking you about this option? Because a lot of people, they're not the happiest with the decision of OSP being the fill-in for this fight. what's sort of shocking to you about him being the person chosen?
What shocks me is that my understanding was Jon Jones wanted to fight for the title or nothing. And as we found out with that Rashad and that Rashad thing, when there's a fight that he wants, he's willing to let a pay-per-view show fall apart because that's what he wants. And he has that right. I mean, he's contractually he has that right. So I really thought it was going to be Daniel Cormier or nothing. I'm just absolutely stunned. Wow. That's the only word I have is wow.
Well, while Kirik composes his thoughts, Casper, why don't you share yours? I mean, it's official now. OSP versus Jon Jones. Who would have thought that would be in a sentence at UFC 197? What's your reaction to the news?
Hey, listen, good for Jon Jones for taking the fight. There's a million reasons why OSP would take the fight, but we all remember the UFC 151 fiasco of '83. We lost a lot of good men, and many of them still haven't recovered since then. So this is it's funny because people talk about Jon Jones hasn't changed. He's still the old Jon Jones. I think in a lot of ways he still is, but hey, this is a change, right? The old Jon Jones probably wouldn't have taken the fight. He actually went on Instagram, put out a video saying that this will make a lot of people happy, and he admitted that it's not in me or my camp to usually take fights last minute, but I'm gonna take this fight. And I don't know if he used the word save the event, but I think it was kind of implied that he's saving the event. Good for him, right? I'm happy about it because otherwise you'd have Demetrius Johnson and Henry Cejudo main eventing the card, which look isn't a bad thing, but I don't think it's what the UFC wants. And I don't know whether it's just a case where he's that confident that he can beat anyone, or it's another case of go win some fans, Jon Jones, go win some fans, and this is a PR thing. And to be honest, I don't really give a shit. I'm just happy that Jon Jones is returning and he's going to be fighting OSP. Well, yeah. I mean, look, I don't love the idea that he's fighting OSP, but I'm happy that Jon Jones is fighting.
Yeah, it's one of those situations. I agree with you guys. I mean, back in the day, you would never thought Jon Jones would have done this, but this is a great thing that he's done. He didn't have to do it. He did it, and now everybody's very, very excited to at least see his return at UFC 197. To me, obviously, I think OSP doesn't really stand a chance against him. He has a lot of holes in his striking game. I don't really think he'll be able to put much together against Jon Jones. I think it'll be a pretty quick victory for Jon. I think I'm going to probably predict a stoppage around the second round. But Kirik, you mentioned that you think OSP will lose this fight. Are you not giving him any chance in this one?
I'm not going to do any 209 bets on it, and no disrespect to him. I just don't think he's far enough along in his development to the point where he can win the fight. I mean, you win a fight by out wrestling somebody, or by knocking him out, or by submitting him, and I don't see in any of those areas where he could do it. I don't think he can control pace, place, and position. I don't think he can take Jon Jones down. I don't think he can knock him out. He can't muscle him. He can't tap him. I just don't see I don't see a path to a victory for him. But I'm not one of his coaches. Hopefully his coaches do see one and they can make something happen for him.
Yeah. you would hope the coaches do see a path to victory. Go out there, get killed, man. No. The other thing that I wanted to sort of mention, because Anthony Rumble Johnson was another possible candidate. Obviously, he didn't get the fight. But listen, obviously you saw that Kirik just heard this from us. We're breaking news. Who would have thought? But that's how fresh this is. So I don't know if Anthony Rumble Johnson's given a statement as we're sort of talking about this, but here's my thoughts on why he wouldn't have taken it. If you're Rumble Johnson, why would you take this short notice fight? I mean, Rumble seems like the type of guy who, in my opinion, who needs to do an entire fight camp to get into truly optimal shape. And I'm not saying that he's out of shape between fights normally, but considering his next fight isn't even on the horizon, totally understandable that he's not in peak physical condition, and he may even be enjoying the good life at the moment. So we're 3 weeks away from the event. I don't think that's even enough time for Rumble to make weight. And considering his past of not making weight, I wouldn't, even recommend he try to push his body and make 205. Add to that, you've already got most likely the dibs on the winner of Jones DC, or now it's Jones OSP. at least then you get to face them on a full camp and prepare correctly. So there's no way I'd take the fight if I was Robert Johnson. He'd potentially lose not only the fight, but also the chance at a rematch, especially considering that Jones's days at 205 are looking like they're numbered. As far as OSP goes, I don't blame him for taking the fight. He wasn't anywhere close to a title shot anyway. His last win was over the recently cut, I think he's cut, Fejao. And before that, he lost to Glover Teixeira. This is like a godsend for him. He's Charlie, and this is his golden ticket. So he'll probably get a monetary incentive for taking the fight on short notice. Great, thumbs up there. And maybe even a slice of the pay-per-view points. I kind of doubt that last part because Jones is the draw here. But hey, he's saving the card, right? So you never know. OSP, absolutely nothing to lose here. So good for him. I'm happy for him.
And just quickly, guys, I mean, I really wanted to see this Mark Hunt, Jon Jones fight. I don't know why. I thought it would be a fun spectacle. Late notice. Mark Hunt's good to come into these late notice fights. His KO power is always an issue there. Did anyone else want to see this Mark Hunt fight, or was it just me?
I would have loved to have seen that because you can see a path to victory. Punch him in the face, walk away, win the fight. Like, I can see that, and it could happen. Those two guys fought 11 times. At least one of them, Jon Jones, is going to get slept. But I just don't see the same thing for Ovince St. Preux. I can't see it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, look, Mark Hunt and Jon Jones, everybody's been wanting to see Jon Jones at heavyweight for an eternity, and hopefully it will happen eventually. The other thing is that Jon Jones didn't really seem keen on fighting a Mark Hunt. I believe I read somewhere in an interview in the past where he said if he's going to make his way to heavyweight, he'd prefer to do it against one of the smaller heavyweights, and he named some names about some of the real big ones. I think Bigfoot Silva was on that list, and maybe even Mark Hunt. So, if Mark Hunt got in there somehow, I don't know that Jon Jones would have taken it. I'm not saying that he would have not taken it. Who am I to say that? But it would have been a crazy fight. Mark Hunt, he's a really heavy guy, and while he doesn't have the greatest takedown defense, he's got a very good body to stuff takedowns. We saw Stipe take him down over and over again, but there were issues with his weight cut. He says that he got completely drained. I don't know. On a good day, I think there's a possibility Mark Hunt may even be able to stuff a few of Jon Jones' takedowns and, like Kirik said, maybe connect, get past that reach. He's obviously not a shit striker. He's an amazing striker. Maybe get past Jones' reach and touch him, potentially even knock him out. So I would have actually been more happy with Mark Hunt than Jon Jones. Mark Hunt versus Jon Jones than OSP. But
yeah, I think it would have been a great matchup. Now, guys, we have run out of time. Kirik, thanks so much for joining us. Guys, make sure to check out mixedmartialarts.com. Obviously, one of the greatest websites when it comes to MMA, and Kirik doing an amazing job all these years for the fans. But you also have to check out MMA.tv. Kirik, for the people who haven't seen what MMA.tv is about, just let them know what it is in a nutshell.
We have two websites. We have mixedmartialarts.com for the hardcore MMA fan base, and then we have MMA.tv, which is for people who like fights. And fighting's in our DNA. Everybody likes fights, so MMA TV is for everyone.
Well, make sure you check it out, guys, because it has a lot of great content. And it's one of those websites you go on when you're having a boring day at work and the boss is out of the office and not overlooking your shoulder. You can put on a few videos and have a bit of a good time. Kirik, thanks again for being on the program. Guys, we'll be right back right after this.
Hey, guys, it's UFC light heavyweight Ryan Bader, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
And there he is, Kirik Jenness from the Underground. Pleasure having him on. Always love when he comes on. We do roundtable discussions. But that's pretty much it. That's another episode from the boys for the week.
That's right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate it. We've had a lot of comments through our Facebook page. A lot of people giving their opinions on the big topics in MMA, and keep it coming. We love listening to your thoughts, and we love getting messages from you guys on Facebook and on Twitter. However you can reach us, always do. We love chatting to you guys and hearing your thoughts and opinions.
Oh, for sure. Sound off in the comments below what you think about UFC 197. Obviously, OSP going in there to face Jon Jones, a very last-minute addition. I know a lot of people aren't thrilled about it, but let us know what you think. We always want to know. If you do get the chance, show us some love on iTunes. Don't forget to give us a review. Give us however many stars you think we are worth. We always really, really appreciate it. Dennis just mentioned where you can reach us. We love chatting with you guys. And that's it. We'll be back next week talking about Rothwell vs. Dos Santos, covering UFC Fight Night 86 with some sexy guests and more fun. Catch you next week.